We got to get a little dark before we get bright.
Okay.
But this will be positive. So obviously, in the past week, some real atrocities have been committed, and as is the typical case, instead of us asking the hard questions and making the hard decisions, we've decided to point to video games as the cause of violence. And I don't really want to have that discussion. We've had that discussion. Let me just give it to you in a nutshell, listener, if this is your first time hearing it. In a couple of decades of people actively trying to prove a link between violence and gaming, we've never been able to produce even one study that does it. So that's pretty conclusive. So let's roll past that. Anyone who says that games are definitely causing violence, you can assume that they haven't bothered to even spend 5 minutes reading about it. And you don't even need to listen to them anymore. And all those discussions are important and they're worth having, but I don't really want to discuss do games cause violence again, because I don't think we need to. There are other discussions that deserve to be had instead. But as far as gaming goes, since it's been getting such a bad rap this week, I thought this would be a good week to talk about some of the positive benefits of gaming. In particular, one of the podcasts I listen to is The Art of Manliness, which when I recommend that podcast to my friends, I always say, I know that sounds like a joke and not like a serious site, but it's actually a really good website, and the podcasts are pretty in depth. But this in the last couple weeks, they had one dealing with stress, and they spent some time talking about acute stress versus chronic stress, because your body has a stress response, and that's natural and healthy and good. In acute situations, some stressor happens, your body prepares and deals with the stress. But chronic stress is a bad thing when you're staying stressed out all the time, and it's increasingly a big problem for us. And there are a lot of reasons for that, especially in this era where we don't disconnect from anything ever. But one major contributor to chronic stress is rumination. So that's when a stressful event happens, and instead of like the stress happens and you move on, you just keep thinking about it. And the example they give in the podcast episode is you go to your boss's office and he just yells at you for 3 minutes. And so realistically, you've had 3 minutes of stress. But then when you go back to your office and you continue to think about it all day, your body behaves as though you've had an entire day of stress rather than just 3 minutes of stress. And within that discussion, they brought up a study about Tetris, because one way that you can short circuit rumination is by doing something that completely absorbs your focus and keeps your mind from wandering away from the thing that you're doing. So if you just get really invested in doing this activity, you can't ruminate. You can't be trapped in your boss's office getting yelled at all day if you can just disconnect for a little bit. And as any gamer knows, games can be an excellent way to completely distract your mind. Gaming is a great outlet for this. In particular, Tetris was involved in a study that proved these things. So gaming as a distraction can be a healthy thing, and it can prevent us from engaging less healthy forms of distraction. So I guess to start the conversation, have you ever used gaming in this way? Like there's this stress, and to get away from the stress, you go and you play a game.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, it's funny when I have like a particularly stressful week of work and I'm like ruminating about it, which I tend to do, because what happens when I have a 3-minute conversation with my boss is I replay it in my head, then I call Larry and talk about it for an hour, and then I come home and I talk to my wife about it for another hour, and then I sit and I stew about it for the rest of the day. And when I have a particularly stressful week, Lauren will always go, it's Friday, once you get off work, just sit down, play a game, just forget about it. And like play a game is always a part of that like step of unwinding, because she just knows that I'm gonna if I play enough Overwatch, I'm gonna find something else to ruminate about, and it's normally whatever Genji's doing.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I've 100% done that as well. I don't know if we're probably going to talk about specific ways we've done that, but the one that springs to mind most immediately for me is Rock Band. I remember throughout undergrad, and actually to a certain extent after in grad school as well, if I was getting stressed out about a final or like a capstone project, or even just like an interaction I had with a friend of mine that was just kind of like sitting ill with me, I would sit down to the plastic drums, take out my drumsticks, and if you're playing drums in Rock Band at expert difficulty on a medium to hard song, not like a fucking like just nightmare song, but medium, like hard to sort of difficult song, it requires a lot of focus and a lot of kind of intense muscle memory and muscle activity. You just have to put everything you have into that song. And so that was a way for me to just like shed everything else. Not only did I have to have my mind attuned to it, I had to have my body attuned to it to succeed as well. So it was just a great way for me to ditch everything, mind, body, and just kind of dedicate it to a game.
Yeah. So, I recognize fully that this was a stupid question. Of course, we've gamed. It's a hobby. It helps us disconnect. It helps us blow off steam. And for me, that's definitely been a big part of why I game. And for sure, there have been points in my life where I probably engaged in it a little bit too much and lost my scholarships in college. Because disconnecting for a while is good, but you can't disconnect so much you don't actually deal with the problems in life.
It's a fine line.
But you do have to be able to get away from the stress for a while. And I should have said this earlier. The two sources that I'm kind of referencing for this, one was the Art of Manliness podcast, episode 525, How to Stress Proof Your Body and Brain. And I highly recommend it. If you're someone who's stressed out, like, go give that a listen. And then there was an arstechnica.com article called Tetris is a Great Distraction for Easing an Anxious Mind. So yeah, anyway, you can go too far with it. It can be a problem. And I think gaming is unfairly considered in that category more than it ought to be, because that's true of any hobby. But within that podcast, they had a great discussion about there are a lot of ways to disconnect and to distract, and not all of those are healthy. You can go shopping to make yourself feel better. And if you've got the money to blow, okay, that's fine. But that's probably going to be worse for you than sitting down and playing some Tetris. Some of us eat when we feel stressed, and eventually that your body is going to keep that record as well. Alcohol, use of things like that can be a way that we disconnect, but it's not necessarily a healthy way to deal with stress, particularly when we chronically go back to that item. So in particular, like, games are just a really good way to deal with that. And they used Tetris as the focus on their study because of how zoned in you get on that type of game, even to the point of you're seeing the blocks drop in your dreams. It's a really it's a really obvious example of a game that really sucks you in. But toward the end of the Ars Technica article, they say, quote, one group, they say in regards to one of the studies involving Tetris, quote, one group played the standard adaptive version of the game, where the difficulty level increased as their skill level did. A second group played a version that was too easy, with blocks dropping so slowly as to induce boredom. The third group played the most challenging version of the game, with rapidly dropping blocks designed to create a sense of frustration. After playing, the subjects filled out a survey rating their emotional state, end quote. And they obviously found that the first group had the most success disconnecting from their stress, the standard version where the game got more difficult to match their skill. And so with that in mind, are there particular games that you found lend themselves more to stress relief than others? Are there games that you can't actually play if you expect to relieve stress? What actually helps you disconnect and find that flow state that just sucks you in?
Yeah, it used to be sports games for me that were a really good disconnect, because I never really played like Madden or 2K or anything like that super competitively. But I would go in, and I like to play sim style, so I'm playing like 12-minute quarters in NBA, and I'm playing on a trying to play with like the most realistic difficulty. So it's a good challenge. The funny thing now though is, within this conversation, like, most of what I play now is competitive, and I'm either playing like League or Overwatch or something like that. And those are not great games to disconnect because, like I made the joke about earlier, ruminating about whatever Genji's doing, and so I don't really have, I guess, a game in my life right now. I mean, I'll go into like the training tool on League and like practice clearing jungles or last hitting minions or something like that, like to just kind of disconnect for a minute. But what's actually become more of a disconnect point for me that still involves games is just watching esports, like, because I'm a pretty active watcher of those things, and so I'll watch Overwatch League or the LEC LCS, like, and that helps me to disconnect. But yeah, the more I think about it, the more I'm like, well, the games I play now stress me out in a different way.
Yeah, I don't think I would never be able to play anything competitive to relieve stress. And I'm obviously not playing like Sekiro to de-stress because that game is just infuriating in its own right. It is something like Rock Band that I think for me requires you to lock in. I think everybody who's played either Guitar Hero or Rock Band for an extended period of time has hit that point where you look away from the screen and you see the notes falling. I think anything like that for me that requires you to lock into a certain rhythm and kind of flow to that rhythm. It's just kind of like a trance-like state you enter into after a while. Similarly to Tetris, and like I've genuinely thought about buying that Tetris game that came out last year. That's trippy as hell with all the like particle effects, just because it seems like a really great way to like zen out for a few hours. Stuff like that. Like I can't play anything narrative based because kind of similar to a movie, my mind may start to wander a little bit, or what's happening in the narrative might connect a little too close to home to what I'm trying to avoid. I can't play horror games. Normally, or if I'm trying to de-stress. Yeah, it's just Rock Band is the thing that I found to be the best. And I think to a certain extent shooters like Halo and Wolfenstein that I've played enough to just kind of get onto their rhythm and I can just kind of play mindlessly. Horde mode stuff usually seems to be pretty good. Like Left 4 Dead, it was always a great way to kind of unwind if I was just playing by myself.
It's funny, I've got like kind of two real mental hangups within myself just to get a glimpse into my mind. Number one, I have like terrible ADD. Terrible. Like where I always joke, like when I'm writing copy, that like I'm sure anybody who's a copywriter for a living like would freak out watching me write, because I'll like start with the intro and then I'm like down in the third paragraph and then I come back in and I'll leave a sentence half finished and hop back down to another idea, like, because my mind just does not work in this very like linear point A to point B way. And the second thing is I'm super obsessive. Like, I get my mind fixated on something. As an example, like a couple years ago, we found one of those like giant ass cockroaches dead in my basement. And all my mind could think of was, our house is infested. It's just infested. And so, I like looked up this article online and it said, the best way to see if you have live cockroaches in your house is like leave all the lights off in your basement. And then when you go down to your basement, turn as many lights on all at one time as you can, and you'll see them scatter if you have them. And for like a week, no joke, I would like wake up in the middle of the night thinking about it. And I'd go downstairs and I'd flip on all the lights to the point where like I had a breakdown at like 10 o'clock at night one night and was like, we gotta get somebody here to look at the house. Like, and I was like on the phone with Terminex lining up an appointment at 10 p.m. at night. So I'm like super obsessive and I have real bad ADD, and they're two things that are terrible. So like, I've been waiting on some emails to come back in for some things I've been sending out lately. And I'm like checking my email every 5 minutes. But what games have allowed me to do to bring this home, thank you for walking with me. What games have allowed me to do, like when I'm playing Madden, I'm like, okay, I am not going to check my phone until the end of this quarter. you know, and it allows me to lock in on those things. And I think that's kind of what you're saying, Cody, with Rock Band, is it's this way to like, you have to be focused on the screen for 3.5 minutes while this song goes. And
it's achievable milestones.
Yeah. It gives your brain like that A to B mindset that I just don't have naturally within me. And games do a great job of just like creating order where my life lacks it in many, many ways. So also, Cody, that helps you if you're ever editing an article of mine and you're like, why the fuck is there half a sentence here?
I figured that out long ago. Games are also just great at playing off of OCD in general. Like if you're obsessive compulsive and you're playing a Ubisoft game, you will not stop playing that game for hours on end because it feeds into that thing that's eating away. It does for me. Like I can't stop playing Ubisoft games because I need to check off every tower and every checklist, every check on that check list. It's just, and whether that's healthy or not is debatable, but it definitely does take my mind off of things.
And so listeners, if you've got a game that really helps you disconnect and de-stress, feel free to weigh in as well. For me, like I'm with you, like competitive games do not do it. Even if I'm good at the game, like there's always going to be something that upsets me, that makes me angry. And when I think to what helps me disconnect, there are 3 games that stand out in my mind. And reading this article and thinking about this actually made me realize that I don't really have this in gaming. For me, this used to be a big part of why I game, but I'm at this place where all I play are competitive games, and that's why gaming does not help me de-stress the way that it used to. That's why I go to bed angry. But the 3 that stand out to me, one is Animal Crossing back on the GameCube. Like you had objectives, you had milestones you could pursue if you wanted, or you could just like screw around and do whatever you wanted. And that was really cool. And I haven't played one since that first one. I tried the mobile game, but there was too much trying to get you to buy things for me to like disconnect with that game. So I'm looking forward to the Switch one that's coming out, you know, in forever from now. But when that game comes out, I'll be on that game. The second
spring,
one,
right?
I just expected it. I'm in the boat of I wish this was here sooner. The second game that comes to mind is Minecraft.
Yeah.
And I like to play in survival mode, but even in that, like the game is not so hard that you can't like unwind while you're playing it. Frustrating things can happen, but it's minor frustrations. And I have a particular, Minecraft, if you're playing the classic way of playing it, it doesn't really have any built-in milestones necessarily, but I have a very particular way that I play Minecraft where I like to spawn in a world, establish the main base, and then I try to like map out the entire rest of the world and create outposts from the main base that you can easily get to. And it's sort of my own self-imposed, like it's a very like it's almost a meditative experience to just I'm droning away, overtaking the world. And then the third one is Mirror's Edge. It was the simple, clean environment, and it was more of a puzzle game than anything else. Just it had this packaging that made it look like you were free running and fighting guys with guns, but at the end of the day, it was a puzzle of how can you traverse the environment most efficiently, and it was a great game for me to relax and disconnect with. Yeah, so that's all I've got on the games helping you disconnect. Games get a bad rap sometimes, but there are a lot of benefits to them, and de-stressing is just one of many.